before you even poured your coffee this morning, you clocked in.
Yeah, without even realizing it.
Right. Like you probably rolled over, grabbed your phone, checked the weather, you scrolled the social feed, maybe paused on a couple of videos, maybe you let a smartwatch log your overnight resting heart rate. And to you, it just feels like breathing. It's just living.
Exactly. It just feels like your normal morning routine.
But in reality, you were working. You were generating this immense value for a multi-trillion-dollar machine. And, I mean, you didn't get paid a single cent for any of it.
Which is a wild to think about. You're basically operating at the very bottom of this massive global supply chain, completely unaware that you are, the essential raw material that's keeping the entire structure afloat.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today we are opening up a stack of really fascinating philosophical, economic, and policy papers centered on this one revolutionary idea.
Which is a total paradigm shift, honestly.
It really is. The idea is that the data you generate every single day is not just digital exhaust.
Yeah.
It's not some byproduct of your modern life. It is actual labor.
Right. Actual structural labor.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission today is to explore how treating your data as labor completely upends everything we know about the internet. We're going to look at how this reclassification alters the way massive tech platforms have to be regulated.
And how corporate executives are forced to make decisions, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And ultimately, how you view your own value in this whole digital economy.
Because framing data as labor, it moves the conversation completely away from the standard talking points about digital privacy. Like, privacy is fundamentally a defensive concept.
Right. It's about protecting what's yours.
Exactly. But labor is about power. We are talking about asymmetric bargaining dynamics and fundamentally redesigning the ethical and economic frameworks of the web.
But to truly understand how this reframing changes corporate policy, we first have to agree on whether tapping a smartphone screen can even be considered, work.
Which is a tough sell for a lot of people.
I'll admit it. My morning scroll doesn't exactly feel like a shift at the coal mine. And the sources we're looking at point out that society operates on this deeply ingrained folk conception of work.
Right, the folk conception.
Yeah, we expect labor to involve sweat, or at least some focused application of skill that takes interpersonal priority over leisure.
The text actually provides a really brilliant analogy to illustrate this societal bias. Imagine this investment analyst named Jyoti.
Okay.
She's had a grueling day at the firm. She comes home and she unwinds by playing a few rounds of Call of Duty on her couch.
Just relaxing.
Right. And her spouse calls out from the kitchen that dinner is ready, and Jyoti shouts back, "I can't, I'm busy." Now, her spouse is perfectly justified in saying, "No, you're not busy. You're playing a video game. Come to the table."
Because her activity is leisure. It commands zero economic or interpersonal priority.
Exactly. But contrast Jyoti with Johan. Johan is a professional esports champion practicing the exact same moves on the exact same maps in the exact same game.
Oh, wow. So literally the identical physical and mental action.
Exactly identical. But if his spouse calls him for dinner and he says he's busy, they might complain about his terrible work-life balance, but they would never claim he's just playing a game. Society views Johan as working.
That's a great distinction. And Karl Marx actually touched on this psychological difference, didn't he?
We did, yeah.
He compared human labor to an architect planning a building in their mind before laying a single brick.
And he contrasted that rational agency with, like, a spider weaving a web or a bee building a honeycomb purely on instinct.
Right. The architect envisions the result and applies conscious effort to manifest it. The bee just does what a bee does because of its nature.
But see, this is where I push back a little. Because if I'm standing in line for a coffee, just mindlessly scrolling a forum, or solving one of those recap TCHA puzzles to prove I'm human.
Oh, clicking on all the images with a crosswalk? Yeah, exactly. I am acting entirely like the bee in that scenario. I'm not strategizing like the architect. It requires zero conscious effort. It just feels like an instinctual digital twitch. Calling that labor seems like a massive stretch to me.
And that's completely understandable. But judging an activity by how difficult it feels is the trap of that folk conception we just talked about.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the economists and legal scholars driving this research argue we need to abandon that purely psychological view. We need to adopt a political economy definition of labor.
Okay, and how did that differ?
In political economy, labor is not defined by sweat, effort, or intellectual strain. It is defined by its role as a factor of production, specifically characterized by an asymmetric bargaining dynamic.
Asymmetric bargaining dynamic. Break that down for me.
Think about the Industrial Revolution. A single worker standing on a factory floor had absolutely zero power against the owner of the capital. The worker had to sell their labor simply to survive, while the factory owner could easily replace them with the next person in line.
Right, so the structural imbalance is the defining feature there. The individual needs the tiny paycheck way more than the massive factory needs that specific individual.
What's fascinating here is when you map that exact structural imbalance onto the digital economy. Today, you as an individual internet user have zero bargaining power against a massive tech monopoly.
Not at all.
Right. You need the search engine to find a job, or the navigation app to drive there, or the social network to stay connected to your peers. And if you threaten to delete your account, the platform does not care.
Because my specific data is just a drop in the ocean.
Exactly. But in the aggregate, those platforms rely entirely on the billions of users constantly generating data to train their algorithms and produce massive surplus value. The asymmetry is identical to the industrial era.
So the focus shifts entirely from the physical toll of the action to the power dynamic that's actually extracting the value. But there is a very popular narrative out there calling data the new oil. Business leaders love that phrase. Why shouldn't we just look at data as a highly valuable commodity rather than labor?
Because treating data as a commodity like oil implies it's a raw material existing independently in nature, like it's just sitting in the ground waiting for a smart company to build a rig and extract it.
Right, like it's just there for the taking.
But data does not exist in nature. It is generated through an ongoing, continuous interaction involving human agency. You literally cannot separate the data from the human generating it.
That makes sense. I mean, oil doesn't have civil rights. It doesn't care if you drill it. I care immensely if a company maps my daily commute.
Exactly. The commodity metaphor completely erases the human element. Now, there is another popular argument suggesting data is actually capital.
Capital, like we're investors.
Right. The idea is that we are all essentially investors feeding our data capital into these tech companies, and we should be treated like equity shareholders.
But true shareholders have a completely different relationship with the company. If I own capital in a business, I delegate decision-making to managers, but I receive quarterly reports. I have voting rights. I have transparency into how my capital is being deployed.
Exactly. And as a data subject?
As a data subject, I am completely in the dark. I have no idea how a platform is feeding my photographs into a neural network to train an AI model.
Right. And that massive information asymmetry isn't a feature of capital ownership. It is a textbook feature of an exploitative labor relationship.
Wow. Okay.
Data is an artifact of ongoing human interaction. So when you strip away the metaphors of oil and equity, structurally, data acts exactly like labor.
So if we accept this premise that every click and every search is structurally functioning as labor, it forces a total reset for the executives running these tech platforms.
A massive reset.
Because in any standard business ethics framework, managers are taught to weigh the needs of various stakeholders, right? You have your employees, your local community, your investors. But elevating the everyday user, the data, subject to the level of a core labor stakeholder, that completely shatters the traditional Silicon Valley business model.
Because suddenly, corporate executives aren't just managing passive consumers or optimizing user metrics. They are managing a massive, distributed, completely unpaid workforce.
And managers are basically being forced to figure this out on their own because the law moves at a glacial pace.
Oh, incredibly slow.
Governments have been so slow to regulate global data flows, meaning the burden falls directly on founders and business leaders to act almost as policymakers themselves.
And we're seeing early signs of this with voluntary ethical commitments from generative AI producers. But embracing data as labor requires executives to look much deeper into the mechanics of their operations. They have to take ethical responsibility across the entire AI data supply chain.
Right. And the SOMA report highlighted in our research really digs into the mechanics of this global supply chain. Because data labor is entirely digital, it's hypermobile.
It can go anywhere.
Platforms can shift their operations across borders in milliseconds. If a platform needs millions of images labeled to teach a self-driving car what a pedestrian looks like, and, say, regulators in Europe pass a strict labor law, the company can instantly route that labeling work to a server farm in another jurisdiction.
And that creates immense pressure on developing nations. The SOMO report uses Kenya as a stark example. The platform economy creates this literal race to the bottom where countries feel pressured to weaken their labor protections just to attract tech investment.
It's just to get the jobs.
Right. And big tech companies are no longer just outsourcing casual tasks. They are directly investing in data work companies in places like Nairobi, fully integrating them into their cloud architectures. They are structuring the global market.
So an ethical manager can't just point to a subcontractor in Kenya and claim they're following local wage laws.
No, not at all.
If the data is labor, management has to ethically prioritize stability and worker well-being across the entire chain. They need robust human rights and labor due diligence, regardless of whether that labor is being performed by a formally contracted image labeler in Nairobi or by you sitting in London correcting an auto-generated transcript on a video.
The managerial responsibility expands exponentially, but implementing that responsibility highlights a massive logistical nightmare.
Which is?
Well, if an executive wants to negotiate fairly with their data laborers, how do they do it? Negotiating with data workers is uniquely complex because data is rarely individual. It is highly relational.
Ah, yes. The research from Project Liberty introduces a brilliant metaphor for this. They call it the shared blanket.
It's your blanket problem.
Data is like a shared blanket. If you pull it towards yourself, you inevitably uncover someone else. They provide some incredibly stark examples of how this works mechanically. Think about a group photo at a wedding. If I upload that photo to a social network and tag myself, I am instantly revealing location data, social network connections, and biometric facial data about every other person in that photo, even if those people despise social media and never consented to be on the platform.
This raises an important question, especially when the implications are even more severe when applied to biology.
Oh, the DNA example.
Yes. If you spit into a tube and upload your genetic markers to a genealogy website just to discover your ancestry, you have just exposed the genetic data of your parents, your siblings, and distant cousins who never agreed to be part of a corporate database.
It's like signing a binding legal contract for your entire family tree just because you were curious about your heritage.
Exactly, which is why the standard model of individual consent is basically a mirage.
So when I scroll through a 60-page terms of service document and blindly click I agree, that legal framework falsely assumes my data only impacts me.
Right. It completely fails to scale to the reality of relational data. Relying on that individualized I agree button actually reinforces the centralized power of massive tech monopolies.
Because they know you won't read it?
They know you will never read the terms, and they know your single click grants them access to a vast, interconnected web of relational data.
And it gets even more difficult to negotiate when you realize how invisible the actual labor is. One of the papers breaks down the 6 dimensions of data labor, which categorize how we generate value. 2 of those dimensions completely change how we should view our daily digital interactions.
Legibility and end-use awareness.
Right.
So legibility refers to whether you even know your labor is being captured in the first place. Active legible data labor is straightforward. If you log onto a crowdwork platform and accept a job paying a few cents to transcribe audio snippets, you know you're on the clock.
But illegible data labor is insidious. It happens when a platform quietly logs your background GPS location while your phone is just sitting in your pocket. Or when an algorithm measures the exact number of milliseconds your screen pauses on a specific advertisement before you keep scrolling.
Yes, that passive collection.
You are generating highly valuable behavioral data, and you have absolutely no idea it's even happening.
Then you add the dimension of end-use awareness. Even if the labor is illegible, say you knowingly publish a long-form article on a public blog, do you know the ultimate destination of that data?
Probably not.
Did you know your article would be scraped without compensation to adjust the neural network weights of a massive large language model? A model that might eventually be used to write articles competing with your own work.
I mean, if my labor is illegible and I have zero awareness of its end use, collective bargaining seems impossible. I can't organize a strike if I don't even know I'm an employee.
Exactly. Without legibility, workers are entirely disempowered. This is why the research heavily advocates for new technological interventions to pull back the curtain. The papers highlight tools like the Facebook Data Evaluation Tool or the FDVT.
And that tool doesn't just offer a vague estimate, right?
No, it actively monitors the data packets your browser sends to ad networks and algorithmically reverse engineers the real-time bidding process. It calculates, down to the fraction of a cent, what advertisers are paying for your specific attention profile at that exact second.
Which is incredible. Tools like the FDVT are vital because they made the invisible mechanisms of data extraction completely legible. Seeing a real-time dollar amount attached to your idle scrolling is the first necessary step toward gaining any sort of leverage.
Because once you know your worth, you can start demanding a fair share.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. How do we redesign regulatory policy to actually empower the data worker? Because for years, regulators have proposed various fixes to rein in tech monopolies. But when viewed through the lens of data as labor, most of those solutions fundamentally miss the mark.
They do. The most common reflex is to demand data ownership. People argue we just need strict property rights.
Like if I own my data like I own my car, I can sell it on an open market and get paid.
It sounds perfectly logical, but the Secretary General of France's Data Protection Agency, Jan Padova, warns against a dangerous, debatable equivalence between ownership and control.
Ownership versus control.
Right. Think about the mechanics of a pure ownership model. If you grant an individual absolute property rights to their data, they are still stepping into the ring alone against a trillion-dollar monopoly.
The structural asymmetry hasn't changed at all. If an app tells me I have to sell them my data rights to use their messaging service, and literally all my friends are on that service, I'm probably going to sell my rights for a free account. Ownership is alienable. I can just sign it away out of necessity.
Exactly. Individual ownership does not solve the power imbalance. Now, another highly debated regulatory fix is antitrust action. The argument is that if regulators break up a massive tech monopoly into 50 smaller, competing social networks, the power dynamic will naturally equalize.
But that ignores the core mechanism of network effects, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Even in a perfectly competitive market with dozens of platforms, my individual data profile is still worth very little on its own.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, the service the platform provides is highly valuable to me. Breaking up companies doesn't change the fact that the worker remains structurally vulnerable to extraction.
So if individual ownership is a trap and antitrust fragmentation doesn't fix the power dynamic, the sources propose a solution drawn directly from the history of the industrial labor movement. When individual bargaining fails, the only effective counterweight is collective bargaining. The research introduces the framework of data dignity and the creation of regulatory bodies called MIBIs.
Here's where it gets really interesting. MIDs. Mediators of individual data. Essentially, highly sophisticated digital labor unions.
Yes. MIBIs represent a brilliant regulatory evolution. They would act as a legal and technological firewall sitting between you, the data creator, and the tech platforms. And crucially, MIBIs would be bound by a strict, exclusive fiduciary duty to serve the best interests of their members.
So, legally, they couldn't possess conflicts of interest or take backdoor payments from platforms.
Right. They aren't just another tech startup trying to act as a middleman and take a 20% cut. They're legally obligated to fight for the data worker.
So if an AI company wants to ingest 1 billion photographs to train a new image generation model, they wouldn't be allowed to just scrape the web blindly. They'd have to sit at a negotiating table with the MIDs representing the users who created those photos.
Exactly. The AMA negotiates the royalties, sets the wages, and dictates the ethical boundaries of how the data can be used. The text is very clear that MIBIs represent a genuine existential threat to the current business models of data extraction.
But a union's power is entirely dependent on its ability to walk away from the table, right? An industrial union halts the assembly line. A digital union utilizes data leverage. So how does data leverage actually work in practice?
The research outlines several mechanisms. The most direct is a data strike.
Okay.
That's a coordinated, massive withholding of data by millions of users simultaneously. Then there is data poisoning, where a union collectively injects inaccurate or randomized data into a platform to intentionally degrade the accuracy of their algorithms.
Oh, wow.
Or they might use conscious data contribution, where MMA directs its members to exclusively provide their high-quality data to a fairer, smaller competitor, instantly boosting the competitor's market advantage.
But there is a glaring loophole here. If I join a data strike today and delete my account, the machine learning model that trained on my data yesterday doesn't suddenly unlearn all the patterns I helped teach it. My data is already baked into their neural network.
And this is where regulatory policy must catch up. A data strike is completely toothless unless regulators enforce a robust right to be forgotten, similar to the GDPR in Europe, but applied much more aggressively to algorithmic models. Regulators must actively police the practice of data laundering.
Data laundering, like washing dirty money, but for information.
It is a devastatingly common practice. Data laundering occurs when a platform technically complies with a deletion request by wiping your raw name and email from their active servers, but they secretly retain the algorithmic weights and biases your data helped tune.
So the ghost of your data continues to generate value for them long after your account is gone.
Precisely. Regulators have to penalize data laundering with severe structural consequences.
It changes the entire mandate for regulators. Antitrust agencies can't just look at consumer prices anymore. They have to assess market concentration through the lens of labor harms. When a giant like Meta invests heavily in an AI data labeling firm like Scale AI, regulators need to scrutinize how that consolidation affects the wages, working conditions, and collective leverage of the data workers powering those systems.
It demands a total rewiring of our legal infrastructure.
Hmm.
It requires a formal legal recognition that the modern internet runs entirely on human sweat, even if that sweat is abstracted into a keystroke or a GPS ping.
So what does this all mean for you? Navigating your life tomorrow. Let's trace the journey we've just taken. We have completely dismantled the narrative of the passive digital consumer. Your browsing history, your private messages, the pace of your morning run, none of this is digital exhaust. Every single interaction is labor. This profound reframing demands that corporate executives abandon the extraction mindset and start treating you as a vital foundational stakeholder in their supply chains. Moving forward, the law must evolve to protect you. We cannot rely on the illusion of individual consent or the trap of pure data ownership. We need the collective power of data unions and MDs to assert our data dignity against massive corporate asymmetry.
It is a radical reimagining of the digital economy. And it brings us to a final, deeply philosophical consideration explored in the research regarding the theory of alienation.
Alienation. So in traditional Marxist theory, alienation occurs when a factory worker performs a repetitive task over and over, completely disconnected from the final product they are building. The labor loses all human meaning.
Now, apply that concept of alienation to data labor, it becomes quite haunting. We have to ask ourselves what our data actually is. It isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. Our data is our private fears searched in the middle of the night. It is our humor, our syntax, the cadence of our conversations, the web of our closest relationships. Our data is inextricably tied to our fundamental sense of identity.
It is the digital manifestation of who we are.
So what happens to the human psyche when that intensely personal labor is abstracted away from us? When your creativity and your intellect are scraped, aggregated, and fed into an artificial intelligence designed to perfectly mimic human thought, you are essentially training your own replacement.
Wow.
As these models become indistinguishable from human interaction, we face a profound loss of enchantment with our own individuality.
It's like looking into a mirror and realizing the reflection has a life of its own, built from pieces of you that you gave away for free.
If our data is our labor, and that labor is utilized to automate away our own intellect, we aren't simply losing out on a royalty check. We are risking the dilution of our own humanity. We are losing our sense of self.
That is a heavy, but incredibly vital thought to carry with you. The next time you pick up your phone to scroll, remember you are not just a user in a sandbox. You are a worker on a global assembly line. And your data is quite literally your life's work. Guard it carefully. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.